I'm wondering, why am I not seeing it? It's showing up here. It's not showing up over there. All right, that makes sense. Let me make sure that it's changing.
Perfect.
All right, well, welcome folks. My name is Elvis Rosado. I currently work for the Department of Public Health. I do a little bit of everything. I've been doing harm reduction and HIV. So I'm the I am the harm reduction and health educator. So I do HIV education. I do a bunch of stuff around opioids and overdose reversals and all that other stuff. I myself am someone who's in recovery. I've got about, I think February the 1st was 30 years. I haven't touched drugs. I do drink my occasional beer. I started drinking a couple of years ago. I wasn't something that ever bothered me. But the nickel tour, my father got me high. I was 11 years old. I used till I was about 27. Found myself in a prison cell. I had made a conscious decision that I would never become my father. If I ever brought a child into the world, then I was done. And after I got arrested, I found out my son's mother was pregnant, and well, the rest is history. February the 1st, 1992, I had made a conscious decision that I was done. He was born January 13th of 1992. So he's 30, and we have this ongoing joke because I call him every February and I go, "Hey kid," it's like, "What's up?" And I go, "Just call him and say thank you for saving my life." He was like, "Oh yeah, no pressure." But yeah, it's been an interesting voyage and journey, but it is what's kept me involved because there's a lot of stuff that I witnessed and wished that either existed when I was using or that at least services were available back then. And I remember being at this halfway house. It was it was called GPCCC, the Greater Philadelphia Community Correctional Center. And it was almost like a halfway house, but you were still locked up. You couldn't go anywhere until they eventually give you a pass to go out. And I remember having a pass and I'm walking back to the facility and there's this pregnant girl sleeping in an abandoned car. And I went back to the facility and I said, what are they doing for pregnant women? He goes, "There are no programs right now because you have to have a pediatrician and you have to have a psychologist and you have to have a doctor. And nobody wants to take that on, so there are no programs for pregnant women." And then we had a couple of Spanish-speaking folks in there who were sitting in meetings, and there was nobody who spoke Spanish as far as therapists. So I was their translator. And I complained about that, and the guy was like, "Listen, this is what we have. If you don't like the way the system is, then go to school and come back." And so that's what I did. I went to school and decided that I was going to do counseling. And after a couple of methadone clinics and some programs, I realized I don't want to do therapy. I'd rather do harm reduction and just work with people where they're at. So that's what's gotten me to where I'm at today. So. But we're going to cover some stuff I'm going to kind of speed through. I think that I'm talking to a community here that has some of this already, this mindset already. One of the beginning stuff that we talk about is being mindful of stigma and not being judgmental of folks because they're using, because the reality is that there are people who are going to use drugs. That's the reality of it. And accepting people where they're at is important. Two is you also have, unfortunately, even within the world of treatment, there is stigma. I remember going to a AA meeting and I raised my hand and I said, "My name's Elvis and I'm an addict." And they stopped the meeting. They're like, "This is for alcoholics, this is not for drug addicts, you're in the wrong meeting, da, 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 da." Apparently not to them, because they do what everybody else does. Even in the streets, you have somebody who says, "Oh, I might be using this, but I'm not a bad person over there. I'm not sticking a needle in my arm. I'm not," and they categorize each other because it's part of the stigma, and I don't want to be labeled this. So I put myself in my own little boat, and we're all still in the same boat. So it's important to remember those. We've tried to switch from using certain language. We say people using, we either say people using drugs or people suffering from substance use disorder. I know that people hate the word addict. I still use the word addict sometimes when I talk about myself. I've never gotten used to saying I am a recovering substance use disorder person. So I just say I'm a recovered addict. But it's something that we understand, like in certain realms, I want to say we have an understanding that it's not meant malicious or It's when you, like I've had this, my brother, you guys are too young to know that. You may not know this, but you guys know who Archie Bunker is? He's like this old show from the 60s. He was a racist and didn't know it. You know, he made this derogatory terms all the time. And even when he said something derogatory, he thought he was giving people a compliment. That's my brother. My oldest brother is like that. He's my mom and Archie Bunker wrapped up. So I can't bring him around my friends or anybody. I told him, I said, you offend everybody in the room within the first 20 seconds of you entering. I can't do it. You know, so that's part of the problem that we have, that some people use these blatant words. And I've gotten him to go from using the word crackhead to people who use drugs. And he's like, those damn crack. All right, drug users. And I'm like, you're getting better. You're getting better. But he's just like, ugh. So it's about, because it impacts folks. You're talking about taking somebody who's already beaten and can barely get up, and let me kick you around a couple more times and degrade you even more. When I first started to come around, when I was first using, not even before I started to come around, when I was first using a lot of the treatment facilities or the recovery houses, there was one that used to shave half your head. You had to earn the other side shaved off. You had to walk around with a sign that said, I'm a baby, I'm a crybaby. Or I used to, not in the cleanest way, but to keep it clean, I used to do oral sex for money. And you had to walk around with this sign, this is what I did. And they would disgrace people and degrade them, thinking, I'm gonna break you to as low as you can go, and then we're gonna build you back up. We're gonna take pieces of them. It didn't work, it just made people feel even worse. And this is part of what happens, you know? So making sure that we understand this. And I mentioned Maddie, you know, you guys have access to this. I'm gonna send the email to her and she can forward it to you guys. So you have the PowerPoint and have this information, but just might be mindful in teaching folks, you know, it's not about we're trying to cover up what people are doing or clean it up. It's about reminding people that they're still people and treating them like, you know, you don't get somebody who goes into the ER with a diabetic attack. You don't call them a diabetes. You know, they're a person. And when they go in, or if somebody has a heart attack, when they go into the ER or to the ED, they don't just say bye. It's like, you know, we're not gonna let you go until you see somebody. We're gonna make sure you have some follow-up appointment and da-da-da-da. Now you go in with an overdose and it's like, oh, you got it right? Okay, bye, get out. Don't do it again. So we need to be mindful, and then, you know, it brings us to why we do harm reduction. And under harm reduction, accepting that drug use occurs, seeking to minimize the harmful effects of drugs rather than to ignore and condemn people, calling for judgment-free resources, and being honest about the risks of drug use. This is where we have been. In 2010, Philadelphia had lost 387 people to overdose deaths. 10% had fentanyl present. And if you notice, as the years went on, the numbers got higher. And by the time you hit 2020, 2017 was one of the highest years we had. We are on the cusp this year of possibly either matching 2017 or going higher. We still got a couple months to go. But if you notice that by the time we hit 2020, 81% of the deaths that we had, there was fentanyl present in the person. We lost folks because I always say, and you'll hear me say this a lot, it's not that people don't know what they're doing as much as it is that people don't know what they're buying anymore. And it'll show as we go along, you'll see that the impact that it's having on people is more because people don't know what they're doing, what they're buying. This is by drug group. You have the dark area is opioids and stimulants, so people are mixing stuff. And in some cases, this is where the difficulty, this is part of the difficulty that we deal with as well at a state level, at a oh goodness, what are you studying again? Public health level. Thank you. It's the end of the day. I turned it off a little while ago. At a public health place, because what happens is that somebody presents to the morgue and has died. They do a toxicology, and the toxicology shows that they had methamphetamine, fentanyl, and some other chemicals in their system. That person is now deemed that they died from multiple substance use because they used all these different chemicals. That's what killed them. They didn't go out and buy those chemicals separate. They were all in the one bag they bought. They just didn't know what they were buying. So you have stuff like this, 578 people were using opioids and stimulants. No, they bought cocaine or methamphetamine, and it turned out that it had fentanyl in it and they died. Some people go and buy cocaine and then go buy a bag of heroin because they want to do a speedball. And they don't realize that both of them had fentanyl, and out the window they went. They didn't expect all that to be in there, it was too powerful. So you see a lot of this. But I always tell people, when you see these numbers of people using multiple substances, you have to keep in mind that there's a good probability that there was a mixture of other chemicals in there that they didn't know were in there when they bought stuff. So, this is by age. They didn't put 15-year-olds and up or 14-year-olds and up because the numbers were slightly low. There were probably like 7 or 8 people, and they didn't want to add it on to there, so they only did from 24 on up or 25 on up. But we have, and I'll show you later in one of the other slides, this has impacted everybody from the age of 14 and 15, all the way up through grandparents, great-grandparents. 70% of folks that have died of overdoses are dying behind closed doors. It's people that are working, it's people that have jobs or living at home with their parents, or they have their own place. We're seeing professionals, I mentioned earlier, before some of y'all got here, we're seeing an increase in laborers, union workers, hospitality folks, servers, bartenders. We've seen an uptick in lawyers and professionals, people that on a Friday night decide to go buy a bag of Coke because they're going to go out and party, they want to go to the line, and somebody sold them something that was either tainted without them knowing or intentionally tainted with fentanyl. You have folks that are intentionally putting fentanyl into everything. You have some situations where the person who's bagging it up is using the same surface for everything. And if they bagged up a bunch of kilos of fentanyl, and now they're doing Coke, whatever was left on the surface from the fentanyl is going to get into some of that Coke. And some people are going to end up buying that. And then you have a crap load of pills showing up on the streets that are counterfeit pharmaceuticals, Oxy, Xanax, Percocets, Adderall, which is huge on college campuses. There's a huge market of counterfeit Adderalls on the street right now, and people need to be careful. I want to say the end of May, somewhere between the end of May and in June, they stopped these 2 women in Arizona. They had 500 million oxys in their SUV that was all fentanyl compressed to look like Oxy 30s. And I'm like, that's a lot of dead people, because one oxy of fentanyl, compressed fentanyl to look like an oxy, has the power to kill up to 3 people. So, but it's something that, we saw coming. These are some of the articles that came out in 2018 when they started to realize that fentanyl was showing up in crack cocaine, it was showing up in powdered cocaine, it was showing up in other substances, and there was a need for fentanyl test strips. Fentanyl test strips were illegal. So if you got caught with fentanyl test strips, it was considered contraband, and they figured if you're carrying those, then you must be carrying drugs too. So we finally got approval from the mayor to have them here, and then eventually the governor at a state level signed them and decriminalized them so that we now can give them to everybody and anybody. But it's also been a challenge because not everybody knows how to use them. And this is one of the things that I always tell people. When we do our fentanyl test strips, every single strip has the directions taped onto it. Because if the strip separates from the packaging and somebody doesn't know how to use it, it doesn't do them any good. And even on the street, sometimes I'll tell people, would you like fentanyl test strip? No, I don't need that. What's that for? And I go, so you can test your shit. So you can make sure that whatever it is you're buying doesn't have fentanyl in it. Oh yeah, I could use those. Do you know how to use them? Actually, no, can you show me? Yeah. Because sometimes people will take them and they don't even know how to use it. And some people say, oh yeah, but at least they'll read it. And I go, we're assuming that everybody knows how to read at this point. We can never assume that. I always tell people, I try to educate, not to to bring people down and make them seem like they're uneducated. But I say I always wanted to be taught, and I like to teach people like I came from another planet, and this is the first time I'm hearing this. So tell me, completely. Don't just give me pieces because you're gonna throw me off. And it's the same thing. I try to give people English. I told my mom, she's like, oh, but you explain everything so, and I said, yeah, because I don't want it to read like when you get your prescription and you roll that paper out and you go, oh my God, what is this? Or legal jargon. 2016, the CDC put this out. 116 people were dying every day in the United States. 11.5 million people misused their opiate prescription drugs that year. $504 billion was spent just responding to overdoses that year. $504 billion. I can only imagine what that would have done if you had invested that into treatment, education, and prevention. But what happens is that we have constantly been a nation of reactive instead of proactive. We're constantly putting out the fires instead of preventing them. The following year, we were then up to 130 people plus dying every day in this country. 11.4 million people misused their opiate prescriptions for the first time that year. They no longer tell us what it's costing us. They stopped giving us that. I guess they didn't think it was important. From January of 2017 to January of 2018, we lost 71,568 people. 2016, we lost 64,000. 2015, we lost 58,000. 2014, we lost 47,000. We have lost more people to opiate overdoses, to drug overdoses in this country in a couple of years than we've lost in all the wars we've had put together. I got this off the TV because I was sitting there and I saw it and I was like, if I don't take a picture, I don't know if I'm going to find it. So you notice it's NBC LX, so it's not your general NBC, it's another station. From April of 2020 to April of 2021, we lost 100,306 people in this country. 275 people are dying daily in this country right now. Now, this got under my skin for the simple fact that we left Iraq, Afghanistan. Afghanistan was the last place, yeah. We left Afghanistan and there was a bombing at the airport and 13 soldiers were killed, which is horrific. But those people were part of a war and they went there with a risk. I'm not justifying, no life should be lost. What I'm getting at is 13 people died and for a month or 2 months, that's all we heard about. The horror of these folks being killed and bombed and what our government wasn't doing and how unfair it was and the families and everything else. You know how long this clip lasted? About 30 seconds to 40 seconds, and then they went on to talk about something else. That's how much time it got, airtime it got, about 40 seconds. And I'm like, it's on an off channel, 40 seconds of time, and yet 13 people got 2 months worth of news. 100,000 people and 275 people dying every day. It's not even news anymore. There is something wrong with our society when they don't think that this is a problem or that it's newsworthy. So, unfortunately, this year, we have already, by this time this year, we have already lost more than 100,000 people already. And we haven't even reached the end yet. So it's probably going to surpass last year's 100,300 and whatnot. This is what was happening here. We had 3 waves, right? We had a wave from the late 90s through 2005 of prescription drugs. That was the introduction of oxys, oxycodone, oxycontin. It was deemed the best thing since sliced bread. By the time you hit 2005, it is the most abused prescription medication in the streets in this country. It gives competition to the heroin industry and forces the heroin industry to bring up the purity of their drug. So you start to see an increase in heroin overdoses now because of the fact that people are getting a purer product, but they don't know that it's pure. So they're still using, if they were using 3 bags in one shot, now that 3 bags may have turned into 6 or 9 and they don't realize it, and more people are dying. By the time we reach 2010, fentanyl shows up, and between 2010 and mid 2011 and 2012, there is an increase in the heroin purity again to be able to compete, because this is starting to show up. By the time it hits 2011 through 2013, this had surpassed heroin. Now, people will say, oh, they're starting to put fentanyl in the heroin. They weren't putting fentanyl in the heroin per se. Keep in mind that when you're talking about heroin, you have to plant the seed, you have to grow the plant, you have to process it, cultivate it, whole 9 yards. Then you have to, do what you need to do, pack it up, and then ship it. It is about anywhere from $80,000 to $100,000 to buy a kilo of heroin. Fentanyl, they take a series of chemicals, they put it into a bath, a big bucket that looks like a washing machine almost. They heat it up, they boil it to a certain temperature, they pour it into these molds, and they have kilos of fentanyl. These are $10,000 to $15,000 a kilo. It is anywhere from 25 to 100 times more powerful than heroin or morphine. And you don't have to plant anything. You can do this in a space about as big as this to the windows, where this you need a farm for. This, if you mix it too much with other chemicals, you'll ruin it and you have to throw it away, you've lost your money. This is so powerful that it doesn't matter how much you mix it. If you've ever watched some of the commercials, it takes a couple of grains next to a penny. It's still lethal. So this thing is like, you can take a kilo of this and make $1 million or $2 million off of a kilo of this. Where a kilo of this, after a while, you might make a couple $100,000, but after a while, you've ruined it if you spread it too thin with other chemicals. So people started to switch to this. By the time we hit this area here, Philly has some of the purest heroin in the country trying to compete. Something we had never seen before, anywhere from 72 to 85% pure. That had never been heard of, not on the streets. You buying a kilo of that purity? Yeah. Somebody buying a bag on the streets of that purity? That had never been heard of. So now people are dying because they're getting this or they're getting too pure of this. Eventually people switched over to this because they were like, why am I spending 80 to 100,000 on one of these when with the money I'm spending with this, I could buy 4 or 5 of these and make 100 times more money than I was going to make with 10 of those. So the business starts to switch up. Now, again, you guys are too young to know this, but in the early 60s, there was a drug that showed up on the streets to try to replace heroin, and it was called China White. It was a synthetic heroin that was being put out trying to do what these folks did. Basically, this is its brother. This is China White's brother now. Back then, the dealers and the manufacturers and the main traffickers were like, we're not having it, you're not doing this. And they put a stop to it. This time, this got in for several reasons. One, you have a community of folks that sell drugs now that don't care about people. I know this is an oxymoron, but the drug dealer of the 60s cared about their clientele and they didn't want to put anything bad in their drug. So they used to cut their heroin with vitamin B, Similac, and stuff that was not going to hurt the person if it was mixed together with their drug. And they would bring somebody in and say, hey, listen, by the way, I have this new stuff. Can you test this for me? We're going to keep an eye on you. I mean, everybody wasn't like that, but the majority of people didn't want to kill people. They just wanted to make money and keep their clients. So they took care of them. This group of folks now, the majority of them are like, if they get your $20 and you die, I'll make another $20 off somebody else. So you have a totally different breed of folks out there now. And unfortunately, COVID happened. So when COVID happened, the world shut down. You can't fly anything in, you can't bring anything in boats. But if you have a warehouse, you can still make this. And transport it in a car, transport it in a truck. Keep in mind, this was new. There weren't no dogs sniffing this out. There wasn't anything in place to detect that this was coming into the country until 3-4 years after it had already established itself. So if a car or a truck was coming through the border, and mind you, you hear Mexico, 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 Mexico. This was coming from China, this was coming from Mexico, this was coming from Canada, and this is being produced here in the United States. I don't know if you guys are familiar with methamphetamine and the process of it. You can put a lab in the trunk of a car to make methamphetamine. You know, you're gonna make small batches. like for personal use, but you can find the recipe, and pretty much everybody and anybody was producing methamphetamine at one time. Same thing with this. This is a series of chemicals, and if you get access to those chemicals, you can produce your own fentanyl. When we first started to see a problem here, there were, I just had the word and I lost it. Turn it off. Fentanyl has, it'll come to me eventually. So if I blur out this word eventually, fentanyl has like its own fingerprint, right? So we used to see two versions of it. Now there's over 975 different versions of fentanyl, which means there's over 975 people producing it, creating it, because depending on who did it, who produced it, they left there's a certain version of it. So unfortunately, it's coming, I mean, let me put it to you this way. In South Carolina, they caught a police officer, a former police officer, retired police officer, who was having it sent in through the mail, because obviously nobody was detecting it, nobody knew it was coming. He was having it shipped in from China, and then he was distributing it throughout the United States. There was a guy in Washington, D.C. who had a job at an office downtown D.C. who had Uber workers who were driving customers to his office. They would come upstairs and buy from him and get back in the Uber and leave. He was literally selling out of his D.C. office, selling fentanyl while he was doing his job, whatever his job was. So we need to be mindful that this is something that everybody blames Mexico, but there's a lot of other stuff around us that's going on and coming in, and people are not paying attention. This is by zip code Philly. The darker the area, the more overdoses it's having. Obviously, this is us in Kensington area and North Philly area. But if you notice, the only places that are left untouched, if it's white, it's not in our county. And if it's gray, it's probably a park or a non-residential area. Everything else has been touched. And it has a breakdown by age and by gender, color and gender, by race and gender. And everybody's being impacted. There is I think there's a 2% decrease among whites. There's a 23% increase among blacks. There's a 11.5% increase among Latinos. But keep in mind that Philadelphia is 43%, I believe 43 or 45% African-American, and Latinos are only maybe like 3%, 4%. So 11.5% increase among Latinos is just as high, if not higher, as the African-American community, because you have a lower portion of the population that have a higher number. So we start to see, again, in 2019, we saw 71,000 people who died and involved opioids. This is one of the pieces I do when I do a presentation for union workers. This was broken down by quarters. So, well, this is by quarters, yeah. In 2015, we lost 702 people in Philadelphia. 107 of them were union workers, union employees, laborers. And if you notice, the numbers kept going up. And there was 224 people in 2017. So it's basically letting them know your employees are dying. You know, and it's interesting, the electricians union reached out to us, and we ended up with a 2.5-year, 3-year grant to do specific education for them, because they had 150 overdoses in 1 year. Not necessarily fatal, but the electricians in Philadelphia alone had 150 overdoses in 1 year. It's like, this is a problem, we need help. So we were able to incorporate and create a grant to do some work for them. Now, this is back to what we were talking about into the introduction of oxys and everything else. If you notice, by 2013, from 2010 to 2013, there was a 286% increase in overdose death in this country. Excuse me. Now, one of the things that happens here is you have the introduction of oxys. We call them painkillers. It's one of the biggest educational injustice that we do to folks. Once again, it comes back to the language that we choose to use. Painkillers gives people the illusion that they're going to go home and take one pill and all their pain is going to go away. Pain medication was not designed to take pain away. It was designed to make you comfortable with it. If it happens to take it away, then amen, even better. But if you still feel pain, it's doing its job. It's not supposed to entirely remove pain. But because we call them painkillers, people go home and they take it and they go, it must not be strong enough. They didn't give me a strong enough dose. Let me try 2, let me try 3. Oh, there you go. I don't feel anything now. This is it. This is the right dosage. And they'll keep doing that. Now, when I went to school, they taught us that if you overtook your opioid prescriptions for 7 to 14 days, you were creating a dependency. 15 to 30 days, you now had a dependency. SAMHSA did a study in 2018, I believe, 2017, 2018, where they discovered that if you overtake your opioid prescriptions for more than 7 days, you already have a substance use. You already have a dependency, basically. You have a problem already. And what happens is people come in, you can walk into any doctor and say, ouch, let me give you something for that. You come back a month later, how are you doing? I'm still in pain. Oh, wow. See? Yeah, it's a lot. They didn't help them. Let me give you something stronger. There should have been a freeze there. It should have been a conversation. What do you mean you're still feeling pain? What does it look like? When do you feel that pain? How? The other thing that I hate is that from a scale of 1 to 10, what is your, But they'll say, they're supposed to ask, what does it feel like? What does it look like? And where is it at now? How is it different from the initial pain? Because sometimes we don't realize that the pain the person is having now is not the original pain they came in with. It's the pain associated with the withdrawal because they've been taking the meds for so long. And, I was listening to a WHYY NPR yesterday, and they were talking to somebody, and they were saying that there was a time where Purdue was actually developing 120 milligrams oxy. It had gotten that high because people had gotten so dependent on it. There was an athlete who spoke, and he was taking 3 40 milligram oxys a day. He was taking 120 milligrams of oxy every day. And he said he still felt miserable when he didn't have them. And it's because the more you take them, the more you need them. So there has to be a point of cutoff. Now, 2 things happened. When I worked at Hahnemann, I had a gentleman come into my office. I was the, it wasn't called harm reduction, risk reduction. I was the risk reduction manager there. And had a gentleman come in, homeless for 3 years in Philadelphia, seriously addicted to heroin, and he was a hot mess. I always tell people, I never judge anybody from the door. So tell me a little bit about yourself. How did you end up here? What brought you to this point in your life? This guy had 19 years in the military, a wife and 3 kids in New Jersey, beautiful life. He stopped on I-95 to change a tire. Somebody drove too close. They hit him. They broke his back. He said he ended up in a hospital 6 to 9 months in a body cast with that little, whenever you feel pain, just hit here. You have people self-medicating themselves. After 6 to 9 months, he said they took it off. They sent them home. They gave him a handful of Percocets. They didn't work. And of course, the nature of the beast is, he said somebody showed up and said, try this. This will make you feel better. In no time, he got a dishonorable discharge, lost his wife, lost his family, ended up homeless in the streets of Philadelphia. Dr. Zarrow used to be the head of the addictions department at Hahnemann. And I said to him, Dr. Zarrow, why is it that we have no problem putting somebody on morphine, but we don't detox them when we let them go? He was like, why would we? And at that time, we were still talking about 7 to 14 days, 14 to 30. I said, you talking about somebody 6 to 9 months self-medicating themselves on morphine. He says to me, I've been here 25 years, I never thought about that. He's the responsible for the addictions department. And I was like, what do you mean? And he goes, well, people come in, they have a problem. We just kind of figure out what the problem is, what's the best solution. We apply the solution, we send them home. And I go, so we're running a Pep Boys for people, huh? We just lift the hood, see what's wrong, fix, and don't think twice about it. That was 2000. That was in 2000. I want to say in 20, during COVID, Channel 10 did a piece on Einstein. And the question was, why are people being put on pain meds and then discharged without being detoxed? And I almost fell out my chair. I'm like, here we are 20 years later, and somebody's asking the same question that I asked in 2000 in Hahnemann. He actually gave an answer. He said, doctors are allowed to put you on pain meds. they're not allowed to diagnose you to whether or not you have a dependency. They're not allowed to detox you. That's a whole nother department. They would have to refer that person to another department to be evaluated. And that department determines whether or not that person needs to be detoxed if they have a problem or not. We did our job, we just sent them on our way. So you're literally sending people out of the hospital with dependencies. And nobody cares because it's not my responsibility. We have what's known as, I don't know if you guys are familiar with naltrexone, Vivitrol. So this is Narcan at a higher concentrated level. It comes in powder form and a liquid form. You draw the liquid, you put it into the dry powder, you shake it, it turns into a milky substance. You give somebody a shot in the butt. Where Narcan blocks your receptors for 30 to 90 minutes, this will block your receptors for 24 to 40 days. So if I have a dependency and I just got off using opioids and I went through Suboxone and I'm afraid that I may relapse, if I get a shot of this, I don't have to worry about it because even if I go use, I can't feel it because my receptors are blocked. You give the person either a bracelet or some dog tags, and if anything happens to them and they end up in the ER and they can't voice it, the ER automatically knows not to give them an opioid for pain. They'll give them something else. According to the manufacturers, there's about 40 different pain meds that don't have a narcotic in it. But you ask for this, and the insurance company tells you have to get pre-authorized. You have to explain to everybody and their mother why you need this for them to try to prove it. And 9 times out of 10, they deny you. And it's like, why is it that the opioid, you can get it without 2 questions? And then this that has no opioid in it, you have to get pre-authorized by everybody and their mother before you can get it. What Vivitrol has done, which is the company here, they allow you, if you have a doctor who's willing to advocate for you, they will give you the first one free. And now you have 30 days, 24 to 30 days to try it out. And if it's working for you, your doctor now has an argument against the insurance company for them to be able to continue to give you this because it's working. It's a life-sustaining medication at this point. But it's harder to get than opioids. And this is some of the problems that we had. During this time period, we had a 50% increase in opiate use and abuse among women. Among men, I'm sorry. Among men, we had a 100% increase among women. We had a 109% increase. It tells you here between 12 to 17 and 18 to 25. The general impact was among 15 to 25-year-olds. There was a 109% increase of opiate use and abuse, right? There was a 72% increase among retirees 62 years of age and older, and an 11.5% increase in overdose death among that population. This is a 2014, 2015, 16 slide. This number is now 65. This number is now 19.5% increase in overdose death. So among people that are 65 years of age and older, there's a 72% increase in drug use, and there's a 19.5% increase in overdose death among that community, that population. I had somebody sitting I went to Harrisburg to do a training, and there was this girl sitting there that kept crying the whole time. She came up to apologize to me afterwards, and she said, "I'm really sorry. I'm doing this because my grandparents both had 40 years in recovery. And since the beginning of the year, they went back out." And she's like, "I'm afraid that I'm going to come." She was like 17, 18 years old. She said, "I'm afraid that I'm going to come home and find my grandparents dead or overdosing." And this is what we've gotten to where grandchildren are now resuscitating grandparents and having to watch over grandparents. So, and this is all related to, a lot of it is related to this, and a lot of it is related to the fact that there's been so much easy access to opioids and everything on the streets that people are just, I come from a community where in Puerto Rico right now, you can walk into any pharmacy and ask for a Z-Pack and get antibiotics without a prescription. Some of y'all call them the poppy stores around here, call them bodegas. But if you go to the majority of the Dominican stores, if they know you, you can get pain meds, you can get antibiotics, you can get Viagra, you can get pretty much anything over the counter, behind the counter there, that should be prescribed, but it's sold freely. And because we come from communities where that's easily accessible, it still happens in towns like this, in Philly and New York and Chicago and other places. And people don't realize that when you hear somebody bought something and died, it's like, but how's that possible? They weren't a drug user. because they assumed that the guy on the corner who was selling Xanax was actually selling Xanax. One of my good friends, he's a mailman. His wife used to work 14, 12, 13, 14-hour days. Never a drug user, but had a habit that once or twice a month, if she couldn't sleep, she'd go down to the corner and get a Xanax. December of 2020, she ran to the corner, got a Xanax, and it turned out to be fentanyl compressed to look like Xanax. He couldn't wake her up in the morning. He still hasn't talked to me. Every time I text him, I go, I'm not ready to talk to you. And he spends the night sending me these heartbreaking songs and these heartbreaking messages. He misses his wife. And we need to talk to, I'm not ready. And he doesn't know how to get past, because he feels like it was his fault that he didn't check on her. But it's like, she didn't know what she was buying. But because the community is used to, around the corner, give it to you. Why am I going to make it, if I can't sleep right now, and this is the logic, because people go, well, why would somebody do that? If I can't sleep right now, why am I going to make an appointment with my doctor tomorrow to see me in a couple of weeks, to see if they give me something, maybe or maybe not give me something for the next time I can't sleep, when I can just go down the street for a couple of bucks, buy one and go to sleep and call it a day. That's the thought, that's the logic. But people don't realize that today that logic can be failed. This is what was happening in the United States in 2012 when the federal government woke up. Florida had not been discovered yet. I'll explain that in a second. All of these purple states were prescribing between 96 to 143 opiate prescriptions for every 100 people per capita. So basically, in some cases, they were prescribing more prescription drugs than they had people. The reason that I said Florida had not been discovered yet, because they later found that Florida was prescribing the most opiates than any other state. One city block had 31 clinics, pain management clinics, on one block had 31 clinics. In 2018, August of 2018, 60 Minutes did a piece and they were sentencing one of the doctors. He was prescribing on average between 100, and I'm glad you're all sitting down, between 100 to 400 oxys per day for one person. And they asked him, did you not see a problem with the way you were prescribing? He was like, I truly believe that people have legitimate pain. I'm screaming at the TV, who takes 400 pills in one day? Like 100 pills, who takes 100 oxys in one day? And he was justifying that people had pain. Yeah, I believe that people have legitimate pain, not 400 pills worth. But that's what was happening. So that's why I said Florida had not been discovered yet, because when that story came out, the other people looked like saints. Pennsylvania was doing between 82 to 95 opiate prescriptions for every 100 people per capita at the time. So pretty much the whole country, except for some of these little yellow ones, which if you look at them, they may be just as bad because a lot of these are in rural areas. So it might still be a lot compared, to the population. I've yet to find 2020, but from 1999, the yellow, orange, and red is where overdose deaths are happening. And as the years go by, the map is getting darker and darker and darker and darker. So once again, we lost 13 people to a bombing, horrific. But from 1999 to now, this has been happening and no one is outraged. This is just a comparison between synthetic fentanyl and pharmaceutical fentanyl. Fentanyl is actually provided for somebody who's suffering from cancer. You see people, AIDS patients, cancer patients. The difference is that anything pharmaceutical, the FDA is monitoring and they're making sure that it's all exactly the same. When you have somebody who's doing it illegally, depending on the combination of chemicals that they put together, that batch could be anywhere from 25 to 100 times more powerful than heroin or morphine. You're never going to get a same measurement because they're not measuring it out to make sure they get it exact every single time. So that's the difference in those. Carfentanil you don't see anymore. It got blocked, but this was an anesthesia or that was to knock out elephants, bears, and it was being put out on the market, it was 10,000 times more powerful than heroin or morphine, so it was even more powerful than fentanyl. But that bottle is probably about 2 inches high, the diameter of a dime coin. That's the amount of heroin that it takes to kill a human being. This would be the amount of fentanyl that it would take, and that would be the amount of carfentanil. And keep in mind that between these two, there's 40 other fentanyls out there right now. Counterfeit Oxy 30s, real Xanax, counterfeit Xanax. You notice that this is a little bit faded, but once again, somebody who's selling these, who is constantly on the corner, yo, I got it, and it's handling. After a while, the letters get worn off, and they start to look like this. So people dismiss, if they get something like this, that it's counterfeit, and just assume that that person has been handling it for so long that they wore off the letters. That's why they tell you sometimes don't shake the pills in the bottle, because they rub up against each other and they crumble. But this here, the other issue here is that I may have a $10 bag of fentanyl, and I'll be like, I take that $10 bag and I compress it into a 30 milligram pill. That's now $30, because oxys sell per the milligram. So if I have a 30 milligram pill that I made out of that $10 bag, I'm now making $30 per pill. I'm going to definitely want to make more money, so they're going to push this more often. And this is going to lead people to die because they're expecting it to be the pharmaceutical, and it's counterfeit. In this event, if you have fentanyl test strips, we always tell people to break the pill in half or crush it, because they tend to have what's known as the chocolate chip cookie effect, which means that when you put chocolate chips into a cookie, some places get chocolate, some places don't. So if you cut it in half and you scratch in the middle, you're getting a better sample of what's in that pill than if you just scrape the outer layers. And then you use that little bit and the fentanyl tested with the fentanyl test strips. But, and that's a whole nother class. And if you guys need me to, I can always come back and do fentanyl test strips trainings. This is something that has started to show up in the United States, in Philadelphia especially, in the last 3 years, 2.5 years. They call it trank dope. It's basically another anesthesia. It's for animals. Xylazine is the name, but they call it trank dope on the streets. This was big in Puerto Rico between 2010 and 2012. The problem with this is the equivalent of a basically like a Xanax for people, but this is actually for animals. So the other problem, you got several problems here. One is it doesn't respond to Narcan, because you can't, that's not an opioid. And two is that once it hits the skin, it starts to deteriorate the skin. It eats away at the skin, especially if there's already sores on the skin. So we're seeing more and more lesions now and people losing limbs again, like we did in the 90s, because of the xylazine. So it's unfortunate, but this is, it's like a benzo. It's the equivalent of a benzo for humans, but for animals. This has also become an extremely, a large reason for sexual assaults and robberies now. Because you get a lot of folks that come out who are using, like they've just been using for a little bit, and they come down to buy something, and somebody will sell them a bag cut with this. This will knock you unconscious instantly. So now you have somebody who's going to be knocked out for at least an hour or two. And during that hour or two, horrific things have happened. When they wake up, they have no way of proving who did it because they were unconscious. You know, I was telling somebody last night, I was in Kensington to meet up with Operation in Our Backyard and Savage Sisters. They were out there doing outreach. And I was blown away about how the faces have gotten so much younger. The women have gotten so much younger out there now. And a lot of it is people who came down and woke up to being, somebody's putting them to work now. Somebody's pimping them out now. And it's like they've taken advantage of them while they were down. And this one, like I said, this will knock you out. And if they keep you intoxicated, if they keep the person sedated, they can sell them and charge for somebody to come in and out. And I'm sorry. It irks my soul. I was teased as when I was out there. I used to sell. And if you were pregnant, I wouldn't sell you. If you were young, I wouldn't sell you. And people were like, what the F are you? You a drug dealer or you a social worker? I said, I'm sorry, I can't have this on my conscience. I can't. So most of my clientele were veteran users who have been using for years. And I was like, all right, go about your business. But I couldn't do it because I just couldn't, I didn't want that on my conscience. And I didn't want to be responsible for contributing to somebody who was just starting life getting jacked up out of place. These are the medications that Narcan works on. Anybody have a question before I move on? I know this is a lot of information. Feel free to ask. These are the medications that are respond to Narcan. I think I burned out. What happens here is everything up to morphine, you generally with one dose of Narcan, you can bring somebody back. Fentanyl usually takes more than one dose. And then methadone, I have it on there as needing more than one dose, but it's because if you mix it with something else, for instance, for a long time in methadone clinics, you have people who they take their methadone and they go outside and they'll buy a Xanax or a Klonopin, and the interaction of the two medication causes them to feel high, and they're gonna be high for most of the day. So keep in mind that probably 70%, I think it might be a higher number, but about 60–70% of folks in methadone clinics are not there because they want to stop using. It's harm reduction. I don't have to be in Kensington. I don't have to be homeless on the street. I can actually keep a roof over my head and manage my life a little bit and still get high because I just go and I get my dose every day and I take a pill and I'm buzzing for most of the day and I'm good. I don't have to be on the corner. Then there's a percentage of folks that are actually trying to stop using. And then there's a percentage of folks that literally went in there and said, I'm done, I'm saying this, and I'm out. So those folks that were taking Klonopin and Xanax and everything else, or benzo, when they came and gave a urine, it showed up in their bloodstream. If they didn't have a prescription for it, they now had to visit their counselor and explain, why is this in your system if you don't have a prescription for it? You don't have a doctor for it. And it could cause them, havoc in their treatment. So there's always somebody at the methadone clinics that I say carries the Bible, the prescription Bible. Generally, you see with this big giant prescription medication book. And what they're looking is to see how things interact with each other. And they discovered that catapress, which is a high blood pressure medication, when mixed, when you take 2 or 3 or more with methadone, it does the same thing that the benzos do. Now you have people that are mixing and getting high, and then no one is the wiser to it because it's not something you're looking for when you do a drug screen. The problem is that people were overdosing and they weren't going to the hospital because whenever I resuscitated somebody, they said to me, I don't do drugs, I'm in a clinic. That's a clear indication that they're on methadone. And, oh, okay, so you're in a methadone clinic. Yeah. All right, so what did you take? Oh, what are you trying to say? I was like, listen, I'm not here to arrest you, I'm not a cop. But if you took catapress or something else on it, you have to keep in mind that methadone has a long life, and so does the catapress. So in 30 to 90 minutes, when that Narcan wears off, if you're somewhere by yourself, you're probably going to fall out again. And if no one is there to respond, depending on the position you fall out in, or depending on the amount of methadone and catapress you have in the system, it could be a fatal overdose at this time. You need to either go to the hospital. I'm not going to the hospital. I don't want nobody to find out. Then you need to stay around a populated area or stay around people who know you, let them know what happened so that they can keep an eye on you and you don't re-overdose and die. So I always ask people, what did you take? Oh, I'm not going to arrest you. I'm here for, make sure you survive. But I left that word up there so that in case I hadn't already mentioned it, we can have that conversation. These are some of the types of opiates that are out there. Both prescription, ones used for treatment, and then illicit. Carfentanyl on there. They haven't put the, there's some other stuff that's not out there that it's in the opioid family. What puts somebody at risk of an overdose? The biggest key factor is an interruption in somebody's drug use. That is one of the key pieces. Most folks don't realize that 24 to 48 hours of an interruption in somebody's drug use, their tolerance has already changed. This is why you have an increase in overdoses during the holiday seasons. People go home, they want to spend time with their family, they don't want nobody to see them using, and so they'll take Suboxone or something to hold off the withdrawals, And a day or two later, they come back to their normal life and they think I can still use the same amount I was using a couple of days ago. And their tolerance has changed and they overdose. Obviously mixing drugs, but again, most of the people who died from overdoses that was considered that they were mixing is because they didn't realize that all that was in one bag that they bought. But definitely mixing drugs doesn't help. A variation in the strength of the street drugs, when you have somebody who is used to buying from this guy here or this girl here, and then that person's materials run out and they will find themselves a new dealer, they end up with buying something that they don't know what they're getting. It's all brand new for them. So it could be fatal because it could be a lot stronger. Switching the mode of transmissions. We saw something in the last 10 years that we had not seen before. And that was that there was a process in the past where I started snorting and then I started smoking, or smoking and then snorting, and then gradually doing a little more and a little more. And eventually I went to shooting up, where now you have people that I don't want to snort, I just want to shoot up. I want whatever's going to impact me the most. And people are going from day one, they're going straight to injecting. So in that kid situation, if the person doesn't know what they're doing, they're going to hurt themselves, or they're probably going to use too much and they're going to overdose. 10% of people who are resuscitated from an overdose die within a year of that initial overdose. They die of an overdose, 10%. Using alone, you have no idea how many cases we've reviewed where when the person was found, there was like 5 to 10, 2 to 3 Narcans laying next to them. They were under the perception or the thought that somebody's going to find me and somebody's going to resuscitate me. But people were in hotel rooms and you know, this is a little bit morbidly funny in a sense, but it's morbid, but it'll give you an understanding of what people are thinking. Because there's people who don't understand that you can go 40 days without food. Not that I ever want to find out. You can go 14, 15 days without water, but you can't go more than 8 to 10 minutes without oxygen. And people don't, and there's some people who don't understand that. So I have a guy come into the office. We had a conversation for about 45 minutes about housing. He gets ready to leave. And he goes, Mr. Elvis. And I was like, he goes, I don't know the situation. Kind of scratches his head and he's like doing this. And I just said, yeah, what's up, man? He goes, I have a body in my room. I don't know what to do with. And I was like, wait, what? I was like, you got a what? And he goes, yeah, I got this guy. I go, he's dead. He goes, yeah. And I go, so why didn't you call the ambulance? Oh, I don't want to lose my room. And I go, okay, you know you can't keep him, right? And he was like, well, that's what I was going to ask you. Can you get on, like, can you come over with some Narcan and stuff and do some rescue breath? Maybe give him some Narcan? I go, how long has he been there? He goes, about 3 days. I go, yeah, not even Jesus right now. I said, you need to call 911. Can you come? I'm not going. I said, you need to call 911. You need to let them know you have somebody in your room who's deceased. I said, what happened? He goes, well, he's from Jersey somewhere. He didn't have anywhere to use. He paid me so that I could let him use my room. And when I was out doing my thing, apparently he did his thing and he died. When I finally came back to my room, he was dead. So I go, well, you know, he's going to start to stink, right? He goes, yeah, it got a little bit inflated. So I just threw a blanket over him. I'm like, oh my God. He goes, but you can't. And I go, no. After like 20, 30 minutes of being dead, he's dead. I can't help it. But he was under the impression that 3 days later, I could still come give the dude Narcan and bring him back. So if people think, you know, somebody's going to find me at some point and they're going to hit me with Narcan and do rescue breath, they're going to bring me back. No. This is why we tell people don't use alone. Because you never know what's going to happen. You can't Narcan yourself. You can't. Unless you use Narcan first and then try to use the drug, then you're going to feel the drugs. That makes no sense, but it's very important. There is a hotline in Pennsylvania. It's a 1-800 number called Don't Use Alone, Never Use Alone. And people can literally call that hotline and say, look, I'm about to use, this is my cell phone number, this is my closest person's or closest friend's number. If I don't answer in a little while, please call them. If not, call 911 and send them to this address for me. Don't let me die. But we're trying to get one in Philadelphia. And then physical health. There are some HIV medications right now that have protease inhibitors in them. protease inhibitors tend to slow down the process of the liver by up to 45%. If your liver is only functioning at 50 or 55% capacity, one bag becomes the equivalent of 2 to 3 bags. One ecstasy tab, which you rarely see anymore, it's now called Molly, but one ecstasy tab becomes the equivalent of 5 to 10 tabs, causing the person to overdose and die, to overheat and die. So what we do is, in the case of methadone, if you're taking methadone and HIV meds with protease inhibitors, some of the HIV meds will elevate the levels of methadone through the roof, causing intoxication and possible overdose. And some of them will dilute the methadone and not allow it to last a full 24 hours, which means that person might get antsy and relapse and go out and use and buy something with fentanyl and have an overdose death. So what we tell people is, if you're on HIV meds for any reason, whether it's PrEP, you guys familiar with PrEP? Okay. If you're taking it for PrEP or you're taking it because you actually have HIV, if it has protease inhibitors in it and you're actively using other drugs, you need to be mindful that it could be, I tell people your doctors need to be speaking to each other. There is a company called VIV, V-I-I-V, that produces a series of HIV meds now that instead of being processed through the liver, they're processed through the kidneys. They were originally designed for people that were duly infected with HIV and hepatitis. And because hepatitis and the medications were both affecting the liver, these medications take some of the trauma off the liver because they're going to the kidneys, and it reduces the chances of other problems. We use them as a harm reduction modality now for people that are actively using and taking their HIV meds, whether for PrEP or because they have HIV. And so one of the things, again, definitely not mixing or any of those other situations that can contribute. The best thing I always tell people, the best thing that you can do is always go into every situation with information. Informed decisions are the best thing to have. Some of the things that can happen. Well, you come across somebody, always make sure to remember that you're the most important person when you come across somebody who's overdosing. If something happens to you, you can no longer help that person. They can't help themselves. So always make sure you use your gloves, always check the perimeter for glass, for needles, for anything you can harm yourself with. Look around your surroundings. If you're functioning by yourself, try to find somebody who's call somebody over and see if they can call 911 and help you with the situation. If not, position yourself in the best situation where you can see what's coming and what's going. I get a little bit skitsy when I'm working on somebody and I can't see who's around me. Yeah. So I try to position myself where I can work, and every time I come up, I can focus on the people around me. So things you want to look for. You're going to come across somebody who is either going to be extremely pale with a gurgling noise, blue, purple. The darker the skin of the individual, they're going to go gray or ashy on you. Those individuals are not breathing. They're in respiratory distress. No need to ask them if they're okay, because they're not. You call 911 immediately. You give clear and precise directions. You proceed to administer Narcan. If you're not sure, then you don't want to put your hands on anybody from the door. What you want to do is try to figure out whether or not this person is or isn't responsive. We have three methods. We have noise stimuli, touch stimuli, painful stimuli. So noise is, yo, you all right? Yo, you okay? Sorry, I have to share. I did this presentation for a place called Self-Help. It's up the boulevard somewhere. They had a huge auditorium full. And I went, yo, you all right? And so the guy back there went like, yeah, it was had a long night, man. I'm sorry I fell asleep. And everybody started laughing. And I was like, I'm sorry, they know. And they really started laughing. He was like, I'm so sorry. Every time I do that, you're all right. I hear him in the back going, yeah, man, I'm sorry. But you want to make noise. You want to try to see if you can wake this person up. I generally tell people, don't put your hands on anybody from the door because you don't know if this person is sleeping. Always remember there are people that are traumatized on the street, and just you touching them will freak them out. I discovered this recently again, where I drove past this woman on Frankfurt, and I lied to you not, she was gray. And I was like, oh crap. So I brake, and I was like, oh honey, are you all right? I was tapping her legs. And the dude sitting next to her, he's like, yeah, she's good, yo. He called her by her name a couple times, and she was not. I said, dude, she's not hearing me. She's not. He's like, yo, he's screaming at her. She's like, she picks up her wig and goes like this in her face, and she freaked. Wow. She started swinging at both of us. She was coming at us, and I was like, oh crap. You know, and finally she like got herself together and saw us, and he was like, stop, we were checking on you. And she's like, you scared the shit out of me. But she wasn't responding. So this is why I tell people, don't put your hands on people on the door, try to make some noise, try to get their attention. If they're not responsive to sound or noise or loud noise, you want to grab the foot, shake the foot, yo, you okay? Because even if they jump up, you can back up and be like, listen, I'm sorry, you weren't looking too well, you know. So if the foot doesn't work, then you go to painful stimuli. Now, this is what they teach, which is called the sternum rub. You're going to grab your knuckles. You're going to go in the center of the chest. If it's not making your knuckles uncomfortable, you're not doing it hard enough. This is not. You're not helping. Just caressing the person is not helping. But this is also in your face. And again, I worry about people's safety and whatnot. So what you want to do is what they call a bed nail press. You want to grab that person's hand. Once you grab that person's hand, you have the distance of the length of their arm and yours of space. That's a safety buffer already. You want to take their hand. You want to grab their ring finger or their middle finger, either one, because they're the most sensitive. You want to sit it on your index finger, and with your thumbnail right before you reach the cuticle area, you want to press that thumbnail in there. If your nails are gel and they're pretty and they're long and you can't, then you want to do the second way they do a bed nail press is like that. You take a pen or a pencil, you sit it next to the knuckle of the finger, and then between your thumb and your index finger, you're going to press that pencil, that pen into the side of the knuckle. It is very painful and very uncomfortable, just like the bed nail press is. So what you want to do is 1 Mississippi, let it go. 1 Mississippi, let it go. 1 Mississippi, let it go. If you do that 3 times and that person they don't respond, they're unconscious. If they respond, whether it's to the nail or the side of the finger, their initial response is going to be to pull their hand back. The minute they do that, you take a step back. I'm really sorry. Are you okay? You may get a beep. I've gotten cussed out a couple times. And I'm really sorry, but you will not. I had this dude. He was on the sidewalk. Leg was behind him. Other arm. I mean, he looked like a car hit him and knocked him on the sidewalk. And then he jumped up once I grabbed the other hand and did the bed nail. I said, dude, you weren't. I was sleeping. I was like, who sleeps like that? I mean, barely he does. So I've learned throughout my years, I've learned a lot of little lessons. But once you get a response, I'm really sorry. Are you okay? You know, you weren't looking well. You were not responding. We were yelling. We were calling out to you. So we were really concerned. Is there anything we can do? Sometimes I'll tell you, yeah, leave me alone. Okay. You did your diligence, you know, you did your duty there. If they don't respond to that, if they don't respond to anything, then you call 911. Clear and precise directions. Always give clear and precise directions. If it's in a building, pick an entrance. If there's multiple entrances, pick an entrance. Hey, listen, we're on Market Street entrance of the, what is this called? The something building?
Nesbitt Hall.
Yeah, there you go. And let them know, because we've had situations where somebody called and the paramedics came to one side of the building and the people were waiting outside on the other. You know, all you have to say is, listen, somebody's going to be outside. They're going to flag you down and bring you to where the person is suffering the situation. We've had students overdose in the men's room, in the women's room. We've had a situation where a student overdosed in the classroom. So you need to be able to give clear and precise directions. If there's more than one person, I need you to call 911. I need you to go outside and meet the ambulance. Make sure that you know which entrance she's going to be at, and blah, 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 and go from there. And then the other folks start to work on the person. 911, clear and precise directions. You proceed to administer the Narcan. Narcan looks like this. You're going to open the package. You're going to do what I call bunny ears, or quote unquote, however it's easier for you to remember. I think bunny ears is usually a lot easier to remember. But take it out of the package. Thumb goes here, fingers go here. You put it into the nostril and you press. Discharges instantly. One in the kits that I'm going to leave with you guys, you have 2 doses. In this one, the knob is red, so the thumb goes on that red little knob. 1 dose. Time check. Time check is for 3 reasons. 1, for your own sanity, because that it takes at least 5 to 8 minutes to fully get into the receptors. But if you're not paying attention, that 5 to 8 minutes is going to feel like 20 to 30 minutes. We had a situation where this new guy was out with us, and I was with Clayton, my former coworker. We gave the guy the Narcan, and well, the new guy was like, "Can I do it? Can I do this?" Yeah, he gave him the Narcan. He goes, "Time check." Clayton was like, 2:25. He's like, "Time check," and Clayton goes, "It's still 2:25, bro. Calm down." But he was so overwhelmed and so overworked that he thought like 5 minutes had already lapsed, and it was like, "You need to calm down. It hasn't even been a full minute yet." The other reason you want to do a time check is you want to wait at least 4 minutes, 3 to 4 minutes before you attempt to do a second dose. The reason for that is you don't want to give somebody too much Narcan too fast. You can send them into withdrawal and you lose the ability now to have a conversation with them afterwards. And that is hugely important. So, and the third reason is when paramedics show up, you need to be able to say, "Listen, I've been working on this person for this long. This is how much Narcan we've administered. This is how much time has lapsed since the last dose." If for whatever reason you forget to do a time check, just check the time when the 911 was called, and you can gauge it from there because that's about the same time you administered it and can go from there. So give the person the first dose. They're not breathing. In the kits, you have a face shield that looks like this, right? You want to open the package up. Yes, it's not easy, but you open up the package, you pull out the face shield. In this case, it looks like this. There's a face on here. If you mess this up, you're more intoxicated than the person you're working on. Face shield looks like this. So you want to match up the face. This is, by the way, this is what happens when the opioids are in your system. They get into the receptors that create that lethargic feeling, and the person eventually stops breathing. When the Narcan comes in, the Narcan pulls out the drug out of the receptors and blocks it out, but the drug is still present. That is important to remember. Oh, okay. That's important. Cookies. So you want to be mindful that when the Narcan goes into the receptors and pulls out the drug is still present. A lot of individuals are under the impression that Narcan is a system flush. It's not a system flush, it's a receptor blocker, right? So this is 10 cc's of Narcan. This is what we originally started teaching with. We used to give you a bottle like this and 10 syringes. We used to teach you how to draw up 1 cc, hit an intramuscular, and if you were going to have to do a second dose, you had to use another brand new syringe so you would contaminate the bottle. If you happen to reuse the same needle, you now might as well give this to the person for their own personal use because you can't use it on anybody else. But this is also what the paramedics used to use. And they would come out and they would hit you with this. This is 10 cc's of Narcan. This will take you from the brink of death to highly pissed off in about 30 to 60 seconds. Because you go from unconscious to sick as a dog instantly. I've yet to see a paramedic say to somebody, "By the way, we gave you Narcan, you shouldn't use for a while, your system is temporarily blocked, the drug is still there." And that is one of the key messages that we need to make sure we give to folks whenever you give them Narcan. But what would happen here is because people are under the impression that this is a system flush, the person is now sick as a dog, they go and buy more drugs, they go somewhere to get well, because they're not getting high, they're getting well. They don't tell anybody that they cop because they ain't trying to share. And now you have somebody who's constantly using and can't seem to get rid of the sickness because they don't realize that the receptors are blocked. So they're using more and more and more. And by the time they use enough to get the Narcan out of their system, they've used so much that now they overdose and no one is there to resuscitate them and they die. So you don't want to, are they there?
They're on their way.
Okay. I mean, this for them.
Yeah.
But so it's important that you not give anybody too much Narcan too fast so you don't send them into withdrawal. If the person, and I'll come back to that in a minute, but if the person is not breathing, I got a mannequin. His name is Manny Quinn. He's got his own ID and everything. But if they're not breathing, you want to do rescue breaths. If you're able and willing, want to check to make sure nothing is obstructing the airway. Sometimes a person will take the needle cap off the syringe, they'll inject, they overdose, and the cap is still in their mouth. Sometimes, again, this is part of that teaching stuff that I was talking about earlier that goes around it and nobody touches on. Back in the days, we used to teach people because people had a tendency, when you shoot up, I don't know if anybody here has ever had their blood drawn, and when they stick the needle in to draw the blood, you can literally taste the alcohol from the swab. I don't know if that's ever happened to y'all. But when somebody shoots up, when you put the syringe in, as soon as they hit the bloodstream, they can taste the drug. And some people didn't like the bitterness of the drug. So what they had a tendency to do was they would lick the tip of the syringe before they used to get rid of get the bitterness out of the way from the first, from the door. The problem is that you now contaminated the syringe with bacteria. When you inject, it gets into your bloodstream, it starts to accumulate at the heart, and it contributed to endocarditis. So the swabbing, the wiping of the area before people inject, people have a tendency to do this. All you're doing is circulating the dirt in a circle. You're supposed to wipe, fold, wipe, and keep using it clean to clean the area before they inject, regardless of where the area is. But so for people to stop doing the licking, we started telling people if you put a piece of candy in your mouth before you use, then you won't taste it because the candy will mask it. The problem is that now with fentanyl, when people overdose, you sometimes find people with candy in their mouth. So whether it's a cap or whether it's candy, if it's there, you want to roll the person onto their side. I had some books also on how to roll people that were inside with the mannequin. I'm hoping he didn't get stolen. You want to roll them onto their side, make sure you have gloves on, sweep whatever's there out, put them back on their back, and you're going to match this up. If they don't have anything, you're just going straight to matching this up. Pinch the nose. This part of the palm goes on the forehead, the other one on the chin. You want to push back. That opens up the airway. If you're having a hard time with this, you can either take a sneaker or grab a coat or something and roll it up. If you put it right here at the base of the neck and the shoulders, it lifts the shoulders up, it throws the head back, and it makes it easier for you to open up that airway. You want to start with a strong breath. 1 Mississippi through 5 Mississippi. Another strong breath every 5 seconds. You want to pay attention to the chest and the stomach. If the chest is rising, you're doing it right. Air is going into the lungs. If the stomach is rising, the head is not tilted back far enough and the air is going into the stomach, that's going to increase the possibility that that person is going to throw up when they come to. You need to be mindful of that. But if it's going into the stomach, that means the head needs to be tilted back even more. If it's going into the chest is rising, you're doing good. You're going to keep doing rescue breaths until the person starts to breathe. Their color came back. They wake up or the ambulance gets there, whichever happens first. If the person starts to breathe and they're not fully awake, you don't want to leave them on their back. They have a tendency to throw up when they wake up, especially if air has gone into their stomach, it increases that probability. And if they're laying on their back, and even if they're breathing, if they're laying on their back when they throw up, they're going to asphyxiate in their vomit. And even if you're there when they start to throw up, if you don't turn them at that moment and they inhale that vomit, the only one that's going to be able to help them is a hospital. There's been cases where somebody gave somebody Narcan and walked away and the person still died because they left them on their back. You want to put them on their side. Easiest way to do that. You have somebody laying on the ground, you want to get onto their left-hand side. For some strange reason, they say if you turn somebody to the left where their heart is, it's a lot better than if you turn somebody to the right. But get on the left-hand side. You want to raise their left hand over their head. You want to take their right hand and you want to put it across their neck like if they were choking themselves. You want to take the right foot and put it next to the knee, the left knee. And if you're on the left-hand side, you're going to grab this shoulder and this knee, and you're going to pull the person towards you. It doesn't matter if that person weighs 1,000 pounds. That process creates a pivot. And when you grab the shoulder and the knee, you go like this, they literally come over like they weigh 15, 20 pounds. I had a nurse who, almost a retired nurse now. And she's like, where were you 40 years ago when I was changing beds? But you can roll the person over. If they go back into distress, put them back on their back. But if you roll somebody into a rescue position, the numbers are backwards because whoever did the slide for me did this left, but the figures were on the right-hand side. So I had to flip them, but then I couldn't get the numbers to change. So I was like, I'd rather have the numbers off than the people. But what happens is, this is a rescue position. When you roll that person over, this arm is now under their head. They end up like this. So what happens now is that if they happen to throw up, it goes away from them. Their tongue comes over to the side, which opens up the airway and allows them to breathe. If and when the person does wake up, you want to have that conversation with them. Listen, we gave you Narcan. Your system is temporarily blocked for the next 30 to 90 minutes. Please do not use anything for at least 2 hours. I didn't use drugs. I don't know what you're talking about. Okay, don't argue with them. Don't argue with them. All right, well, something happened because it took Narcan and rescue breaths to bring you back. Let me just explain what that means. That means that if you have anything in your system that is of an opioid, heroin, anything like that, it's still there. You can't feel it because the Narcan is blocking it out. If you happen to use anything else, you're not going to feel it. It's going to accumulate on top of what's already there. And when the Narcan wears off, it could be an overdose and possibly a fatal one. Excuse me. I never tell anybody that I call 911 because all they heard was you called the cops. They put their running shoes on and you miss the opportunity to educate them and let them know what's happening, and they may go use more and use alone, and it could be fatal. What I do is I wait, and once the ambulance shows up, I go, by the way, the ambulance is here, you should let them check you out. The other thing you want to be mindful of is you hear folks say, oh, I heard that if you give somebody Narcan, they get angry and they start screaming and yelling at you. I've done over 100, probably about 110, 115 reversals. I've only had one person get angry at me, and it was because she was trying to kill herself, and I brought her back. And I was like, you picked the wrong place to kill yourself. If you do it here, I'm going to bring you back. So what I do know is that the majority of folks who have a tendency to say that are firemen and police officers. And what do they have in common?
Keeps him being very sporty for like, I don't know, I just like, yeah.
But what do they look like? You got uniforms, badges, radios. They talk to people in a high tone of voice. They hover. Yo, what you take, guy? What you doing, man? It doesn't matter if this person passed out because of the heat, if it was, they had a diabetic episode, or if they overdosed. They don't know that they were out. If when they come to, all they see is this and the radios and everything, that's going to freak anybody out. So what you do is that once a person starts to look around a little bit and I step back, I let them acclimate, I bring my voice down, and when they look at me, I go, you all right? Who are you? What's going on? You overdosed. I don't do drugs. Okay. Let's go from there. If they try to get up really fast, I go, whoa, slow down. Because you've been out for a little bit, want to make sure you didn't hit your head or anything when you fell out. Are you okay? What's your name? Do you know what you use? Was there a stamp on the back? I always ask, was there a stamp on the back? Because I also want to keep track of the stamps that we know for a fact are hurting people. But the other thing is, if you give somebody Narcan and it wasn't an overdose, you're not going to hurt. All you did was block their receptors temporarily, and if they do happen to use an opioid, they're not going to feel it. But it's important to always have that conversation with people. There is a standing order. There is a standing order in the state of Pennsylvania, which has multiple things connected to it. One, everybody and anybody can now walk into a pharmacy, hand over their insurance, and access Narcan without a prescription. If you have public assistance, it is completely covered, including the copay. If you have private insurance, there is this form that the pharmacy is also supposed to have. This covers up to a $75 copay. If you have more than a $75 copay, just swipe that little card, find out who's handing out free Narcan. If not, give me a call and I'll give it to you for free. But other than that, for private insurance, there's this now, and the pharmacy is supposed to help you fill this up. But The other thing, and then there's the Good Samaritan law is attached to this, which states that if you provide assistance to somebody, just like CPR, you're not going to get arrested or anything like that. And the third portion that's attached to this, which ironically enough, and it's been good to see a lot of the officers, a lot of the cops in Kensington have lived by, and that is that when you show up to the scene of an overdose, it's not to question, search, or arrest anybody, it's to make sure that people get to the hospital. And they've gone a little too far with it. Because we had a situation on Frankfurt and Allegheny where the guy overdosed while he was driving and he crashed into this family. And they said, we can't arrest him for DUI because he was overdosing. We can't arrest people for overdosing. And they told the family, it's an accident. You guys have to take this up, but we can't arrest him. And they didn't arrest him. They took him to the hospital. But other than that, yeah, you can't arrest. You're not supposed to arrest, search, or run anybody's name to see if they have warrants, which is one of the few reasons why people don't want to go to the hospital. They're going to run me. They're going to find out they have warrants. My parents are going to find out. The bill's going to go home and they're going to see it and they're going to know what happened. My clinic is going to find out. So then this is where we tell people, all right, well, does anybody out here that knows you? Is there somebody you can stay with until this is all like, you acclimate a little while and make sure that you don't fall out again. And then if I have extra Narcan, I put it in their pocket and give it to them as a ticket with you, let your folks know you have it. And if you happen to fall out again, if you stop breathing, tell them to hit you with Narcan, but not to let you die. I think that's pretty much it with. Oh, the other thing I didn't mention with the causes of overdose is dehydration. On these hot days like this, we see an increase in overdoses. And part of it is because, part of it is because if you're not getting enough water into your system, the drugs are sitting on your liver, they're going to become toxic. So where somebody does an overdose from using one bag in the spring, or when the weather is nice, they could when the weather is extremely hot because they're dehydrated. So part of harm reduction for me is I will take a couple of coolers, put ice in water bottles, put it on a cart, and just walk up and down Kensington handing out water to people, letting them listen, you gotta hydrate, dehydration. A lot of people tell you, I didn't know that. We found during the 90s when I was doing HIV work, we had folks that were taking at that time anywhere from 40 to 80 pills a day to treat their HIV. And we saw a rise in what was known as medication-induced hepatitis. So people had all the symptoms of jaundice and everything else of viral hepatitis, but they didn't have viral hepatitis. And it turned out it was the medications were sitting on their liver and they were becoming toxic. So what they found is that people who were taking large amounts of medication or HIV meds at the time, where they tell somebody you need to drink at least 8 glasses of water a day, those individuals needed to drink 16 glasses or more a day to flush out the meds so that they wouldn't get. And we found that's when we started to find out the impact of HIV meds on the liver and toxicity levels and the importance of drinking water. If you don't drink enough water, if your urine is always like this, you're not drinking enough water. Or you're taking medication that is tinting your urine. But if you're not drinking enough water, you're probably getting leg cramps, body aches, constant dry mouth. All those things are signs of dehydration and not drinking enough water. And if you're taking medications, certain medications, you need to be drinking enough water to flush them out of your system. I don't have a slide of it. It's in one of my other PowerPoints, but there's also, because the other thing is learning how to manage what causes pain. Dehydration causes pain. You don't need medication, you just need more water. If your mattress has been, if your mattress has your body shape already in it, and you get up and it's still, it has a cubby in it, time for a new mattress, you're going to have body aches because your mattress, time to change that mattress. This, which has been the latest cause of people's pain, they have what's known now as text neck. Text neck is an actual medical condition now. When your head is like this, it weighs 12 pounds. When it's like this, it weighs about 30 something pounds. When it's like this, it weighs 60 pounds. It's the equivalent of 60 pounds of pressure on your neck. So this is why you have people now constantly doing this and always feeling pain here because of the amount of time that they spend looking down at the screen. And what happens with these situations is, I'm having pains with my neck, I can't really sleep, let me give you something for that. And once again, we're back at that. I did teaching for a long time, and I tend to experiment with people, not in a bad way. But like one of the things I used to do when I came into the classroom is that I noticed that if I walked in and be like, all right, everybody, this is what we're doing today. She's talking over there, and this person's talking over there, and she was talking over there, and they were talking. I said, so the next time I came in, I was like, hey, what's up? How was your weekend? How's your day? How's your morning? So how was yours? And I go all the way around the room and make sure I checked in on everybody. Never had a problem teaching. So I also started doing, like, not to put you on the spot, but troublemaker of the class, constantly getting out of their seat, constantly talking, throwing stuff, blah, blah, blah. I said, what's the difference between this person and this folks over here? So I started asking, how many of you guys have video games at home? You got one person in the class. How many of you guys have, what kind of games do you have? And then you start looking at, you have a 12-year-old, you have a 9-year-old, you have an 8-year-old playing Grand Theft Auto and all these, adult games. And I'm like, and you start to see it. So I have a friend of mine, and she calls me one day, and I pick up the phone, and all I hear is, I swear to God, I'm gonna kill it. I'm like, what's wrong? Oh, I'm tired of this. I'm getting calls. Da, 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 da. I said, let me ask you a question. Are the calls coming in around Wednesday or Thursday? And she goes, yeah. How'd you know? I said, when you watch him sleeping, is he like all over the place on the bed? And she goes, yeah, he's like sleeping. It's like he's running in place. And she's like, do you know something I don't? And she goes, can we meet up? And I was like, yeah, we went to lunch the next day at a diner. And I sat down, he's 8 years old, sat down. I go, what's up, man? I got Grand Theft Auto. And I was running over people, and I hit somebody to hit with that, and I ran over a cop. And she said, I was like, oh my God, Grand Theft Auto. And she's like, what's that? I go, that's a video game. And I go, that's the one I bought. She goes, yeah. I said, didn't the store tell you? He's 16 now, by the way. He was 8 at the time. And I said, didn't the store tell you when you buy that video game, they're supposed to ask you, is this for, who's this for? Because it says mature on the back. She was like, oh, they didn't ask me, I just bought it. And I go, she goes, well, what am I supposed to do? I said, get rid of the video game. Oh, he's gonna get upset. You're the parent, get rid of the video game. But what am I supposed to do? I said, you get age-appropriate video games. Just don't work with me here. She calls me 3 weeks later, and I go, you all right? And she goes, I don't know who this kid is. I said, what happened? She goes, I'm in the dining room, and I hear something crash in the living room, and he ran past, and he ran back with the broom and the dustpan, and then he came back and got the vacuum, and he vacuumed everything up, and then he came back and said, Mom, I made a mess in the living room, but I cleaned it up. Is that okay? And she said, I don't know who he is. Everything he's going to watch now, Mom, is it okay if I read this, or can I watch this? Can we put this on? Because I also had to tell the grandparents to stop playing Tour of Duty in front of her. She's like a totally different person. And I was like, you know what the problem was there? You didn't know that you were overstimulating your child with the video games. And because of the amount of time he was playing, and what's happening is this, there's a concept there. Killing is wrong, but I'm enjoying myself. Now, as an adult, you can differentiate that. As a kid, they can't. So this is happening. So now they're overstimulated. So by the time that Wednesday got around, they were like, because their body is trying to rest, but their mind is not. And that's why they're in bed doing this. And once you took the stimuli away, your kid can rest. I said, the sad part is that 90% of our communities out there, the first thing they do is, I'm going to take you to a therapist. And the therapist goes, what do you think the condition is? What do you think? What's the initial condition the therapist jumped to right now? Yes. Your child has attention deficit disorder. Let me give you something for that. You now have kids getting medicated, not because they suffer from attention deficit disorder, but because they were overstimulated by something and nobody is removing the stimuli, instead they're medicating them. So by the time they hit 18, they have a history of mental health issues that don't exist, right? Fourth grader gets up and she says to me, Mr. Elvis, I gotta go because I gotta see my therapist today. You in therapy? I'm in therapy too. And I was like, uh-oh. Fourth graders, 28 kids in the room, and I go, raise your hand if you're in therapy. And it was like, 16 out of the 28 were seeing a therapist. I said, keep your hand up if you got video games. I was like, oh my God, here we go again. People don't realize that there is a difference there. You guys are going to encounter this because you also, there is a, if you ever get into mental health or addiction services or anything like that, there is a DSM-5 book, which gives you people's diagnosis based on their behaviors. I came out of prison. I had stopped using. Mind you, I used from the age of 11 till I was 27. I came out and I didn't know what to do with myself. I had all this energy and I was anxious and I couldn't sleep. And I went to see a therapist. The therapist was fine. Her doctor kept telling me that, like the boss, the doctor kept saying, you're suffering from anxiety disorder. You need Klonopins. And I said, dude, I used to eat those things 15 at a time. I'm not taking them. No, you have anxiety disorder. I don't have anxiety. I have anxiety because I stopped using and I don't know what to do with myself. I've never been like this. No. So for a year, we had this conversation. Once a month, I went in for therapy. I would go into his office. He'd give me a script. I'd rip it up, throw it in the trash, and walk out. The last time I went to see him, he had the bottle filled. He's like, take this. And I got so angry, I grabbed the bottle and I smashed it against the wall again behind him. And I told him where he could go. And I told him a couple other choice words. And I walked out. I get home. I turn on the television. And guess who's on the news? Dr. Tremogli. He had been practicing for 7 years on a stolen license. He had 500 patients in Philly and Jersey. And he got caught because he committed this guy to the psych ward. And the wife said, I need you to release my husband. I'm not releasing your husband. I'm going to our lawyer. Wait, we don't need lawyers. And she left there like, why did he like compromise so quick? What happened there? And they started investigating. Keystone sent everybody a $5,000 check for their troubles because the lawyer said that it turned out that he had whited out everything and hand wrote in the number, the license and everything into it and submitted that and Keystone accepted. And for 7 years, he was practicing with people, playing with people's lives. But I always tell people, not everyone, if you're born with clinical depression or you're born with anxiety disorder, is one thing. If there was something happening and then later when that something stops, you're suffering, it's not the same treatment. You have people who need medication and you need people who just need time. And that was part of my thing. My thing was I just needed to learn how to live life without a substance. I had never done that before. When I was in the programs that I said I went out and saw the women in the car and stuff, he says to me one day, and again, this falls on the person in recovery or trying to get into recovery, and that is acknowledging where your boundaries are, where your limits are. You get a pass tomorrow. And of course, I went up to my bed and I sat there. We call it maquineando in Spanish, maquineando. My wheels were turning. And I was like, and then I caught myself and go, you're about to make a mistake. So I went back downstairs and I said, Mr. Rump, his name was Henry Rump. I said, Mr. Rump, if you send me out there tomorrow by myself, I won't be coming back. Oh, you learned it. If you send, and I just kept repeating myself. 15 minutes, Mr. Henry, Mr. Rump, you cannot send me out. I can't, you've earned your pass. You've been here for several months. He's like, I don't understand what the problem is. I said, let me explain it to you. I have not had a sober birthday since I was 11 years old. I was on 10th and Lehigh. I said, you go out this door, you make a left on Germantown Avenue, you go down 2 blocks to Indiana, between Indiana and Cambria and Germantown, there's a graveyard there. That's where I slept. If you send me out here by myself, I'm not going to make it. He goes, but I don't understand. I said, tomorrow's my birthday. And it'll be the first time since I was 11 years old that I celebrate a sober birthday besides the one I celebrated incarcerated. That it'll be the first free birthday I celebrate. And if you send me out there by myself, I can guarantee you I'm not going to make it back. Finally, I convinced him to send me with an escort. I learned how to walk around the neighborhood and not go through my own grounds because I knew, even when I started doing this work and I went to do outreach, I could go out there during the day. It didn't bother me. I tried one day during the night. I started throwing up. I got the shakes. The girl that I was dating at the time, she was like, what's wrong with you? I said, we got to go. And she said, but we haven't even started out. I said, honey, we got to go. I got to go. I can't do this. But you have to know where your limits and your boundaries are. If you don't find that, you find yourself. problems. And that's something that's not taught to people. You know, and that's part of the treatment process that I think that doesn't exist right now. And it's allowing people to realize, you know, I consider myself a spiritual person, so I'm not gonna preach to you, but there's a scripture that says, when you think that you're strong, you're actually weak. And when you can acknowledge your weaknesses, when you find true strength. And it's being able to say, I can't do that. I know I can't, because it's gonna cost me pain. I'm sucking up y'all time now. I need cookie time. Does anybody have any questions, any concerns, anything that left you questioning or? No,
I just wanted to ask, like when you're staying with someone, like I guess like once you administer Narcan and they're like starting to wake up, you know, you don't tell them that 911 is coming, but like, you know, should you like wait there for like 911, like while the whole group is? Because like how would you handle that situation?
I generally stay. I don't like to leave people alone. I had mentioned, I think before you came, and I didn't mention to the group, but you also have situations where the person is not overdosing. What happened is that when the person got high, I guess, or under the influence and they fell over, they cut off their own respiration and they can't breathe and they're so knocked out that they can't straighten themselves out. So sometimes you may find somebody in a sitting position and you grab them and pull them back, right? And you realize, okay, they were blue or they were purple, but it was because the position that we're in, not because they're overdosing. So in that case, what I do is I put them in a rescue position, or I make sure that the way they're sitting or laying, they can breathe and they're not gonna choke on anything or anything like that. But when I give somebody Narcan, I tend to stay with them until they wake up. I try to have a conversation with the fire department and rescue. You rarely see the police anymore, at least in Kensington. It's mostly, you know, fire rescue or the firemen. Sometimes if they're overwhelmed, the firemen will come up in a regular truck. They'll secure the person until the ambulance can get there and then check on them and whatnot. But yeah, now if I have no choice to leave the person for whatever the reason, then I make sure that I left them, one, in a rescue position, comfortable, and that I gave adequate directions to the fire people to get there, you know, so they know exactly where they're getting. But 99.999% of the time, I've never left somebody by themselves who I resuscitate.
Right. I was like trying to like, wonder if like people might be really pissed off that 911 is there, and so like how do you like watching out for like their safety, but also your own personal safety?
So, like I said, I've never had an issue with anybody with 911. I did have an issue with 911. I had these new cops who had not been trained, who I walk up and they're telling one of my colleagues, you can't give that person that. You're not a doctor. We don't know what's in there. And I was like, I walked up and I said, what are you doing? And she's like, oh, I don't know this, but this person is claiming that they know what they're doing. I said, they do know what they're doing because I trained them. Oh, but you're not, are you a paramedic? And I said, no, but this is what I do. And they were like, well, you're not. And I said, listen, I'm gonna tell you right now, you have one or two choices. You either arrest me or you just stand aside because I'm gonna give this person Narcan. I said, call your captain. I forgot what his name was. This was 2 captains ago. I said, call your captain knows me, tell him Elvis said this to you and take it up with your captain. I said, other than that, you're gonna have to arrest me because I'm not gonna let that person die. Oh, I don't know what you're giving to, you guys may be killing them. And that's gonna be a lawsuit. I said, you know what the lawsuit is gonna be? That we were standing here and you did not allow us to give this person the assistance they needed to survive. I said, this is like you telling me I can't do CPR on somebody, you know, or jump in the water to save somebody who's drowning. I said, so which lawsuit do you wanna deal with? The one that we bought them back and the person might decide to sue you because they were trying to kill themselves? Or the one that they died and the family sues you because you refused medical attention? Well, and finally I had a conversation with her. I said, don't you know what Narcan? We weren't trained. And I said, okay, then we need to have a conversation. I had a conversation with her. And I told her, talk to the captain, let him know when I can come in, ask him when I can come in. I'll come in and I'll train you guys on what's happening. I said, but you can't be out here. I understand that you want to do your job, but there's certain things you can't do out here. You can't stop somebody from saving somebody else's life. You're creating a problem and you don't even have the information. So now it's kind of funny because they see me and they're like, I can't make. Great. But still have my roots. I got stopped almost 2 years now. I got stopped. I was in a suit, driving while Puerto Rican. I came out of work and I looked down the street and it's like 500 cops down there. It looks like a Christmas tree. And I was like, yeah, I'm not going that way. So I went around the block. Woo! So what's the problem? He said, you know why we stopped you? And I was like, mind you, it's like flashlight here, IV. So I can't even see them. He was driving like somebody with a gun. I was like, wait, what is that? And I said, he said, where you coming from? I said, work. Where you work? Right there. Can you prove that? I said, yeah, I'm gonna reach for my ID. Please don't shoot. Oh, yeah. I showed him my ID. He said, all right, get the hell out of here. Have a good night. And I said, you still didn't explain to me. He is driving like I got a gun. Oh, bye, have a good night. So I called a friend of mine. She's the community relations person at the 25th district. She's like, what's up, honey? I said, some of your friends just stopped me for driving like I got a gun. She goes, what is that? And I go, I don't know, you the cop. You tell me. She goes, where'd that happen? I told her. I said, what they doing? I said, oh, it was two tall white guys. I couldn't see them because they have flashlights. She goes, we'll take care of it in the morning in roll call. They haven't bothered me since. They did stop me a couple of months after for expired registration. And he grabbed my, because they all know me now. He grabbed my ID, he goes, oh, Elvis. And I go, yeah. And the guy goes, you know him? And they go, we know him. Give my license back. He goes and gets in his car. The other one comes over, opens the passenger side. He goes, your registration is expired. And I was like, but I grew up during the Rizzo era. I was, and this is my argument. I tell people sometimes, I get the right to say F the police. I got beat by them for hanging on corners and stuff like that, but I'm still trying to build a bridge between them because they still have access to the same people we serve. And if we don't educate them, then we're on this side trying to help and they're on this side destroying. And it's trying to get them to see past, their own crap. And here goes, so you have a little understanding of what's happening. The person who's my friend, we attempted to date. Never thought I'd be dating a police officer, but we tried. First date, we got hit by a DUI while we were on our way to the movies when I met the police. Second date, I had gone off on vacation. I came back and as I'm like, literally I was gone for 2 weeks. I'm refreshed. I'm walking to Prevention Point. This guy runs past me. It's like 8 o'clock in the morning. He runs up to this couple sitting on the steps. And he shot the dude 5 times. The girl was pregnant. He shot her once. I ran down there. Obviously, the dude was dead. There's nothing I can do for him. So I called 911 for assistance. She works at the district, so she showed up. She's like, are you okay? What's going on? I told her, what happened, blah, blah, blah. We were supposed to go out that night. And I called her back and I said, listen, is it okay if I postpone or hang out? I said, I'm really a little effed up in the head after this. I just want to go home. Are you brushing me off using this as a BS excuse to throw me off? And I was like, seriously, are you in therapy? You calling me crazy? And I said, no, that was a clear PTSD response you just gave me. Because I said to her, I said, you do understand I saw somebody get killed, right? That happens here all the time. That's a daily thing. I said, are you in therapy? I said, that's a clear PTSD response. Whether you see 20 murders a day or whether you see 1 every 6 months, that is not normal and that's unacceptable. The fact that you think that that's okay because this happens all the time, that lets me know that you're in a fight, flight, or freeze situation. And I said, you guys see this more than I do. This is like the 4th time in my life that I've witnessed something like this. And it F's me up. You guys see it every day. I'm sorry. Y'all MFers are running around with guns. No wonder y'all shoot first and ask questions later. Are you mandated to treatment? She said, no. It's up to us if we want to get therapy or not. I said, so you guys see all this horror and you don't have any treatment whatsoever to deal with it or vent it, and then y'all run around with guns and shooting people first. She eventually heard me because we didn't talk for 3 months after that. And then I ran into her, totally different person. She goes, I took your advice. You were right. She said, I didn't realize how out of touch I was. And I go, now you need to share that with your coworkers. I said, because no wonder you guys treat the community. I said, the community is traumatized You guys are traumatized and you're taking that out on the people that you're supposed to be helping and serving. Anyway, I'm gonna get off my soapbox, guys. We'll be going. I left you guys Narcan. I gave you guys.
Thank you for doing that.
Also, if anyone wants, like, could speak up themselves, yeah.
Did I miss anybody?
Yeah, I think we're good.
There are some cards, even though I think you have some in your baggie, but grab these, share some of those. And even though it says heroin at the top, fentanyl isn't heroin, if you look down at the bottom corner, it'll also say other drugs on there. And then this one says, this one's on crack, so take this one as well in case you have. You can always photocopy these and share them or whatnot. And if you ever need them in Spanish, let me know.
Yeah.
You can keep this. Yeah,
Yeah, these materials are great.
when I send you the PowerPoint, I'm gonna also send you, I have a copy of the photos of how to put somebody in a rescue position, that thing that I did step by step. We have photos where I'm turning somebody and working on somebody. You guys can also, if you want to make a little manual or something, so you can practice with it, or.
Yeah, that would be awesome.
And then if you ever decide that you want to do a train the trainer, which basically means I train you guys to do this, let me know. That takes a little bit longer because you have to walk me from when you come across somebody all the way up to when they wake up, what are the process, and make sure that you're comfortable doing it, so you'll be able to then teach it to others.
Right, correct.
So, but thank you so much, guys, for your time. I hope there was somebody online somewhere listening. If not, you missed it.
It's, we're done, this is probably,
Oh, you recorded it?